What's up, guys? We have two incredible guests with us here today. Andrew Harvot, who's the co-owner, CEO of Advanced Muscle Mechanics, and Daniel Palacios, the founder of Kinetic Training. Now, we're going to be talking about all things bench, including a bench for your bench, and so much more. So welcome to the show, Andrew and Daniel.
Thank you, John. Appreciate you having us.
Thanks for having us, man.
Yeah, this should be an epic show. And before we get into the thing that a lot of people are going to tune in for, how we can bench more effectively and without pain, let me ask you a little background. Let's kind of get some backstory here. Can each one of you share just a little bit about your fitness journey?
Dan, I'm going to let you kick this one off. Take it away.
I love you. I'm kidding. The short version of that journey really is I was an athlete my whole life. I was a football kid. Knew I loved football from the time I was really, really little. So I played full contact, full pads from about 8 or 9 years old until I was in my 20s in college. And that was really the initial starting point for me learning strength conditioning. And I got the opportunity to train with a great coach who's still out here. Coach Pete Bomarito was my strength conditioning coach my senior year of high school. And that was what turned me on to becoming a strength conditioning coach. So hopefully Pete will see this because I want him to do the launch pad too. But that was really where I cut my teeth on getting really high quality training. And I immediately knew that this was something I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And that's what I studied in college. So I went on to study exercise sciences, got, personal training to certification, CSDS, all that different fun stuff. And by about 2011, started my career training with a facility called Ultimate Sports Institute under some Miami Dolphins, and particularly a gentleman named John Gamble, who was really sort of considered like one of the godfathers of rehabilitation style training. And, he came from University of Virginia, coached the Miami Dolphins. And he really was, one of those really, really special coaches who understood what it took to train athletes at a high level and build really strong, resilient athletes. And it didn't always necessarily mean, being the most powerful heavy lifter in the room. It just meant learning to train smart. So that's where I learned most of that type of training in the early years of my career. I mean, that was the very first stuff that I learned. I wasn't an LA fitness trainer and didn't want to be. So, it was at the time when I, went to go on to leave those guys, that I had discovered this sort of niche in the market, which was to say, the online training world was really up and coming. Most of what people were doing was on YouTube at the time, around 2014, 2015. And I just saw this great need for strength conditioning coaches, personal trainers to, embark outside of the walls of the box, so to speak, or disembark, I should say, and start learning more about, integrative training techniques and getting, better tools for training, because so much of what I saw in the gym and the people I was training, barbells and dumbbells weren't necessarily suited for them. And that came from training a lot of special populations, adaptive athletes, things like that. So I started seeking out different kinds of training tools at that point and wanted to create educational and promotional content around that, because I saw so many coaches were apprehensive about using new tools because they just didn't see anybody else doing it. And all of the big timers at the time were doing barbell and dumbbell training, right? Nobody, what you see that's so commonplace on Instagram these days, that's more, mobility work or, rehab style training, whatever it is. And that stuff's being integrated into actual workouts. We were doing that back in 2011 when I first learned, and up until that, like 2017 point when I finally started Kinetic Training. So that was my goal, was to find all of the best and brightest innovative training tools that were out there and just start creating as much educational and promotional content around them as possible. And funny enough, it was actually pretty late in the game that I found the Launchpad and Advanced Muscle Mechanics and Andrew. And that was something very early on that was instilled in me. And my training was, the bench press is to be used not at all, just sparingly and for the right person at the right time who needed it. And really the only type of, modified versions of what we were doing back then, because we trained a lot of tennis and a lot of overhead athletes, volleyball and baseball players, people like that, is we would modify by doing dumbbell work from a Bosu ball or a stability ball, but that has limitations of its own and dangers of its own. So, it really wasn't a problem that was being solved, and no one was touching it. I'm telling you, I looked for the better part of 6 years until really Andrew and his associates, kind of fell into my lap in a very serendipitous kind of way when we met at a coach named Eric, the trainer's gym in LA for the LA Fit Expo. And I had no idea they were going to be there. It's just how it happened. The moment I saw this thing, I immediately knew that what I'd been looking for was found. And it happened to be that it was surrounding an injury event that I had with my shoulder on a bad re-rack with a cambered kabuki bar. I went over the top of a rack and missed the re-rack with 185 pounds on the bar and had to pull that thing back over. So my shoulder had been jacked up for a little while, and I was a football guy, man. I love bench pressing. So, for me to lose some of that as part of my training and have to really modify that for a while was a tough pill to swallow. But it was the moment that I found the launch pad that it really made a difference in how I start training it, because I could train the bench press consistently without as much worry of my shoulder being injured and without having to focus as much time on auxiliary shoulder and scapular training exercises. I could train the bench press and get most of those benefits all at once. And that's where we've kind of crossed paths at this point, and everything is intersecting. So that's my sticking to it.
Well, it's cool. Before we bring in Andrew, it's crazy how everything is a small world. We've had Eric, the trainer, here on the show as one of our past guests. So, and we're sad to hear about his passing, but he was a great guy, and he took us on a tour of his gym. So he had some crazy stuff in there, sticks and stick fighting, everything you could think of. So it's just small world, very small world. So that's very cool.
It's almost mind blowing that you guys cross paths as well.
Yeah,
that's crazy. So I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm ready to hear. It's gonna be some good stuff.
So it's a very interesting story on how Dan and I crossed paths, because like he said, it was completely sporadic. I didn't even know I was going to meet Dan. I didn't know I was going to meet Eric. I had no idea any of this was going to happen. So we'll take it back a few steps though. I'll give you a little background on myself and my fitness professionalism, I suppose you could say. So I grew up an athlete as well, like Dan, football guy, baseball. My brother played in the San Diego Padres organization. So baseball and actually football ran in my blood too. My grandfather played at Ohio State. My father was a D3 running back. I was a running back. You got to do something at this short height that I've got. So strength training was always a thing. I wanted to get ahead any way I could. I knew I wasn't going to grow taller, so I was going to grow wider. I was going to be faster than everybody. And I was normally one of the stronger people, period, in the school. And that went, even down here in Texas with these huge, huge high schools. So bench press, as Dan said, was a staple, like every football training program that has probably ever existed since the beginning of time. It seems like it was one of the big three. You had that's how they measured your strength. And so that's something that's always hit home and been real close to the heart. And it always, drew an interest of mine. And it was my lift. Besides squat, I had a really good squat too, but I couldn't touch a damn power clean if my life depended on it, because my form always sucked, and it felt like all it ever did was screw up my elbows or wrists. So I hated it. But our school had powerlifting. So I actually got into powerlifting freshman, sophomore year. And of course, you got to make weight. So they're always telling you cut weight, stay with. And so I ended up getting irritated with that and didn't go very far with it, which I regret now. But it was only a club sport at the time. It wasn't a school sponsored sport. It was kind of an extracurricular. Same with the case when I went to Texas Tech, and the powerlifting team was trying to recruit me there. It was only a club sport. The school didn't sponsor. You don't get scholarships like you do now. So it's a damn shame to see it all change so drastically, because I would have not even hesitated to do it now. But hindsight is 20/20, I suppose, like they always say. And like Dan, I started out actually studying exercise sports sciences in college. But at the time, it wasn't as popular. And, I'm thinking, I don't want to be a personal trainer, which it's funny I say that because I'll get into that here in a minute. Um, and so I didn't really know what the hell you could do with it. And so I went through 2 years of that, and I switched majors to engineering and then into finance. I still graduated 4 years with honors. So I'm a smart meathead, but I know how to apply myself when it counts, I suppose. So I graduated with a finance degree, moved back to Dallas, got into digital marketing of all things with my finance degree. So I did absolutely nothing with it, which is typical of a lot of people when they go to college. They do something that has nothing at all to do with what they got their degree in. And I did that for about 10 years. And it was a high pressure sales environment, very similar to Wolf of Wall Street, and that's not an understatement. And we'll just leave that there. Um, but I think everybody can understand where I'm going with that. You don't have to name names and all that type of thing just to make a point there. But I got tired of it. It was, it was driving me insane. It was always, what can you do for me lately? Like in every sales environment, they never really appreciate you, and they're kicking you out the door the minute they don't want to pay you. So I quit that and I actually got into personal training, which I didn't want to do in the first place. But I was like, well, this will be kind of my staging area. I'll figure it out from here. I was planning to get certified as a CSCS and get into coaching. So I always liked coaching and instructional settings, but I didn't want to be a trainer because it's a different, more frustrating side, I think, from at least my experiences. And Dan, you can probably second that. That most of the time, when you tell somebody to do something and when you're training them, they do the exact opposite. So it can be very frustrating. And of course, your results that they see are a direct reflection of their commitment level. And it goes back and forth. But so COVID-19 hit, and I had some downtime. And I guess I was contemplating my life decisions at that point, especially when the gyms closed and that was your source of income. You really start to contemplate your life decisions and how you ended up there. Dan, I know you you know how that goes. And so I've always had a thirst for knowledge, I guess you could say, and I was kind of doing my homework and doing some continuing ed, and I was taking a course on my own behalf. It wasn't required by any means. It was way above and beyond, but it was in biomechanics. And they were actually discussing the mechanics of the bench press itself, the actual exercise mechanics. And there, I was watching, and I was actually following up, watching a video, Ben Pekulski going through it, talking about it as well. And a light bulb went off in my head. Yeah, I sat there and watched a 20-minute video of him going through all these cues and things that he does just to get people in the right position to execute properly. And then they were still struggling. And that's when the light bulb went off, and I was like, why the hell are we doing all these things just to lay down in the bush? Why isn't the equipment designed to put us in position? Why do we have to do all this acrobatic shit just to get in the position to press? And then once you get into position, it's still much more, there's so much more to it than that. But if you can put yourself in the right position to begin the exercise, you guys know as well as I do that your central nervous system will do most of the work. Your body's intuitive enough where it will execute almost without being, guided. It'll just kind of take over. So that's when it went off. And so middle of the summer at this point, worst time to be in the garage. And I just decided, screw it, man. I'm gonna try and take a run at this and see what I can come up with. So about a year went by, and trial and error. I designed it by hand. Actually, I'll show it to you guys in a minute. The actual prototype that I built by hand, and then went to an engineer, and he laughed at me as a Russian guy that was an Olympic powerlifter during the height of the Soviet Union, which made it even funnier. He goes, hey, you did it backwards. And I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, you're supposed to come to me first, not spend all this time designing it because I'm supposed to help you design it. He goes, much smoother that way. It's like, I don't know. I don't it's the first time I've done it before. I don't know what you're talking about, man, but he's funny. He's an awesome guy. His name's Boris, and he knew right away what I was going for. And to be perfectly honest with you, the original design that I came up with and built by hand isn't that much different than the actual final product. It's just the much more finalized materials, and he just kind of polished it off, I guess you could say. And we obviously had to put it through its testing and whatnot. It's a beast. It's put it through 2,200 pounds of crush testing. And it didn't even flex. So Dan gave me the idea to run it over with my car. Did that. Didn't even phase it. So it can be run over with a car, and it will not. It'll probably outlast most benches. But you know, that being said, I brought that to market, and I was like, well, I'm a decent sized dude. I'm about 200 pounds, but that's nothing. And to turn heads and get people to listen to you, unless you're somebody and they know who you are. Like, I need to get somebody that'll stop everyone in their tracks and they'll listen, even if he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Just be a big dude, because I knew my best chance was to reach a higher or a larger audience would be online. So I needed an influencer, which I didn't want to go with, but started out with a guy named Kevin the Hulk Washington. Things kind of went sour with him, but in the middle of working with him, I met Midwest Calm, and they had kind of an internet beef thing going. They were supposed to have a bench off at CT Fletcher Gym at Iron Wars, and they were going to see who could do 225 more than the other. Of course, Hulk didn't show up. We knew he wasn't going to. And Eric and Kong had made acquaintance at this sometime before then. I think he said it was like the Arnold Classic the year before in Columbus. He had met him, and Eric said, "Hey, next time you're out in LA, come by my gym." So he hits up Eric. We go by. Long story short, we're about to leave. I mean, within 30 seconds. And Eric's like, "Hey, hang on just a second. I want you to meet somebody." And that's when Dan walked through the door. So it's a crazy story. And I didn't have to say a word. Dan got on a thing, and he pitched it better than I probably could have at the time. And I was like, "Man, you're like the Billy Mays of fitness." And I've been calling him that since. Like, I don't know if that's a compliment, but I appreciate it. Yeah, you remember that, don't you, Dan? And it's like I was so shocked. I was like, "Holy shit, who is this guy?" And because you knew exactly, like I couldn't have even explained it that well, and you just took it and you're like, "Nope, I know exactly. Just let me try it." And you're like, "This is it. This is what I've been looking for." It was like, "Thank you, somebody that understands that I don't have to, give the entire backstory for them to get it. Like you can look at it and get it if you know a little bit about lifting, and then once you get on it, it's a whole nother story." So long background to come up, but incredible story nonetheless. And you couldn't even write it. I mean,
Make this stuff up.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's what I was going for. You can't even make this shit up because it was literally, I'm telling you, Dan, maybe 30 seconds or less. Because Colin was, he had Iron Wars that day. He ended up winning both the 225 and 315 rep battles. I think he did 60 or 5 of two reps at 225. And then I think he did in the 40s or 50s, 315. That was one after another, too. So that he's a machine. He's a whole nother story. But I was like, "Man, we got to get you some food. Like, you can't we can't go to Iron Wars without you eating." And because
I you with Kong holding off on eating food to be able to meet with me for a second. So.
no, it was crazy, man. I mean, I'm glad it happened that way, though. I mean, Dan's been my right hand man since. I mean, probably the biggest believer in it because he understood it and he felt it right away. There was no explanation. I didn't explain a thing to him. He explained it to me almost. So, but yeah.
But to keep it short and simple on that concept to everybody is you really don't have to understand it to feel it, but you have to feel it to understand it. And once you do feel it, you're going to want to understand it that much better. So that's really where we've come to at this point. It's been a heck of a ride to get here, John. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah, and it's awesome because I want to get into this for a second. I want to talk about the most popular lift for most guys, which is the bench press. Love it or hate it, every Monday is International Bench Day, as everybody knows. It's so interesting because I'm a guy, that's kind of been out of the box. In my books, we do a lot of kettlebells. I train with heavy steel clubs, maces, barbells, fat bells. I'm just kind of out of the box guy. But we do have some people that, we talk about the bench press, they don't really understand how the bench press hasn't evolved. And I want to talk about what is wrong with the traditional bench press. And then I'll just say up front, some of the ways that I've tried to remedy over the years, and they aren't original. I've used an ab mat under my back, rolled up towels, Bosu ball, the Bosu Elite, which is a little bit stronger, but I have never ever. So I want to go two kind of things here. I want to talk about what's wrong with the bench, and then I want to talk about how powerful this product is and how well it's constructed. The launch pad actually weighs about 20 pounds, right? It's a beast.
22 pounds.
Yeah.
It's made of polyurethane and anodized aluminum. It's a tank, quite literally.
Yeah, so people, when they talk about doing something, they say, well, I'm just going to get an ab mat, or I'm going to put something in there that's just, you can't even, it's comparing apples to oranges, and we'll get into that in a minute. But for people who don't know, yeah, he's got it right there. You can see it right there on the screen, and we'll have some pictures up there on the internet too. For people who don't know, the bench press hasn't evolved in a long time. And so if you guys can kind of just jump in here and talk about what is wrong with the traditional bench press.
Dan's really good at keeping this one short because I'll run with it and it'll be an hour. Dan,
Me
you
too.
hit the main points, and then I'll add to anything that maybe you might have left out that is important. But
we in the process, the fun part of the process of marketing is you have to go out, think outside of the box to figure out sensible ways to connect with people, and that involved a little bit of research. So that brought us to a gentleman named George Hackenschmidt, also coined the hack squat. And this is a guy who was training in all kinds of funky different ways. And, he went out of his way to start out floor benching. And it was, I think, 330 pounds or something crazy like that. I had to look at the actual number there again to understand what that looked like. But this guy got under a bar for the first time and bench pressed 330 pounds from the ground. So clearly, whatever training he was doing up to that point, that trained him pretty well to do a bench press. And really not a lot changed about the bench from then on out. I guess he designed a few benches to be able to actually do it from an elevated position, but they were primarily flat surfaces that were probably slightly cushioned or padded to allow for a certain level of comfort when you're loading up that amount of weight. But they didn't have the ability to study those things really effectively back then, from any particular perspective. Even just scans like X-rays and things like that just weren't available. So it was hard to understand the level of impact for the long term, especially once you start looking at large swaths of athletes who are doing these things over a long period of time. And so the bench press really never changed. It was a somewhat of an if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of situation. Or if you can do it well enough and smart enough for long enough, and manage to get through your career without it affecting your ability to perform, then do it in the ways that you need to do it.
We're going to get back to the show in just a minute, but if you want your very own launch pad, you can save big with coupon code JOHN20, JON20. Now, the Pressing Limits podcast is brought to you by ZionMissionaryChurch.net, where you can listen to messages, you can send in your prayer requests, you can even find out how to plan a visit, and by Neuro Power Source, resources for your mind, your body, and your spirit. Now back to the show.
It was really, competitive bench pressing powerlifters and football players who had those long-term exposures that would cause those major injuries. And then, the average fitness guys, right? So, when it comes to what actually causes that problem, it's that consistent exposure to a surface that really isn't designed for anybody and everybody who's going to partake in this particular activity, right? And you got a million different designs out there for benches, but really they all come down to being about, yay wide.
Things on average.
And it's a padded surface. So the moment you start loading up any kind of significant weight that could potentially cause major injury, your shoulder blade is just going to get sandwiched. And the fact is, it can't move the way it's designed to. And we know well enough from the rehab environments now at this stage of the game that, artificial bracing might cause a certain level of external stability, but what it does definitely cause is the stabilizers to shut down.
Right.
And all the other big prime movers are getting trained and getting stronger. The stabilizers aren't keeping up, which is how did we address that in the training environment? We did all kinds of auxiliary scapular stabilization and rotator cuff work. But, there's only so much time in that training basket to plug in more exercises, right? So, again, that's where, for me, I had been searching for something like this for a long time, and really nothing solved the problem of that issue with the actual bench press design itself until I saw the launch pad. And there are a number of different designs out there that attempt to do it, but no one really hit the mark the way that the launch pad has.
Well, to add to that too, it was almost like a backwards research experiment for me because so I wanted to initially my intent was to design something that made it easier for coaches, trainers, folks getting into lifting to master the the setup and the execution of the bench press. But in doing so, I had to go back because like anything, you can't just bring something to market and start making statements without being able to back it up and show your sources and show this is why I'm saying this and this has been studied for years, so on and so forth. And in doing so, that's when I actually I made the discovery that it's the flat surface itself that causes what they call scapular dyskinesia that is responsible for almost all shoulder pain that exists when people are pressing because the moment you interrupt the natural rhythm that exists between the humerus and the scapula, you're looking at problems because that has to maintain its natural rhythm in order for the rotator cuff muscles to function properly and not get stressed. And when you interrupt the movement, one of them or a pair of them, even sometimes all of them, all three groups of the rotator cuff muscles get stressed out. And that's when the humeral head starts to shift. That's when you get impingement. And then it's even further downhill from there. That's just the start. But it's been found that it's the interruption of that movement that causes the initial problem almost every single time. And most people have no clue that exists. And manufacturers have been, I don't know if they've been ignoring it, but I know that coaches must be aware of it because it's been published in the Journal of Coaching Education and many other top sports medicine journals and stuff that are distributed to coaches on a regular basis to, obviously include and implement the latest and greatest in training, but also keeping their athletes safe in the process. But once you interrupt that movement, they say that's the root of the cause there. The flat surface is not designed to allow the shoulder to function as it's mechanically designed to do by nature. So you're putting extra load and pressure on a joint that's not meant to handle it. And when it just sits there and gets sandwiched, yeah, it feels more stable, but that's not how it's designed to move. It's supposed to transfer force. So you're stressing the joint out as it's breaking down. So when you're coming down with your arm, it's supposed to, your scapula is supposed to do like a sliding motion around your ribs to accommodate the force that's being placed on it and facilitate the proper execution of a bench press. So when it gets jammed against the bench, it actually prevents that from happening. And over time, it just destroys the shoulder. And it's almost just a matter of time for most people. I mean, unless you're just one of the few lucky ones, there's not that many. It's just a matter of time. I mean, you go to any gym across the country and pull 10 people out of the crowd that are been working out for a little bit of time. And they don't even have to be that long sometimes. And I bet you 9 out of 10 people have had or still have shoulder pain and will avoid the bench press or just have quit bench pressing altogether because of it. So, bodybuilders and folks like that are in tune that it also doesn't allow for full range of motion and proper development of the musculature as well. So that takes into part a lot of other things, including development of strength and, functional carryover into sport training and whatnot too. But it's the design itself, as Dan was saying, since the inception. George Hackenschmidt hasn't changed pretty much at all. Just became a thinner table,
Mm-hmm.
and here we are. We're 2024 and we're still using the same damn thing. And it's time. I noticed that, and it was like, it's time to change this because, just because you've been doing it forever doesn't mean it's right. It's just what and no better. We're not saying that you're doing it wrong, but you're doing what you could do with what you had. And now we don't have to skirt the problem anymore. Let's actually address it, and let's get people better and keep them doing what they love. In the long term, you're talking about way better development of your chest and shoulder musculature and keeping them healthy in the process. So, I mean, that's hard to beat. A lot of people get sidelined, and the bench press is your favorite lift. That's going to keep you out of the gym because all of a sudden you hate going to the gym because you can't even do your favorite lift that you built all your confidence on. So, it's quite an eye-opening experience that that I've been on, and obviously Dan was aware of, and a lot of folks are aware of, but they just kind of accepted it. And so, it's long journey, but
Sure.
I can go on and on, but it's the interruption of that movement that causes, or that natural rhythm that causes the problem. And no one's ever addressed it. And
Until
go ahead, Dan.
until now.
Yeah, exactly. Until now. And what also went into the launch pad, besides those angles, the chamfer filleted side panels that allow for that movement to take place, is a lumbar support. Because when you look at a power lifter, they arch their back for a reason. They're trying to line their sternum up so that they're recruiting more of their chest, because when in doing so, you're stronger. So I wanted people to be able to do that without knowing that they're doing that, or having to understand it, because it's hard to teach, for one. And if you tell somebody to arch their back, they're probably going to do one of those ridiculous arches you see all over the place online. And your spine needs to be supported. And it's another health issue that a lot of people have lower back pain from benching long term too. So I wanted to take that into consideration, and also offer a solution that would long term help people get stronger, resilient to injury, and have carryover into functional training as well.
Yeah, and for a lot of people, they don't understand because they think that the bench press is primarily a chest exercise, and the traditional bench doesn't really bring the chest in a lot at all. And they don't really understand. And again, everybody's just been they go through the motions, don't understand necessarily the science behind it, how the scapular muscles play not just a role in safety, but the scapular muscles are where the strength gains come from. And so one of the unique things about the launch pad is it not only puts those scaps in the right position and able to move correctly, you're actually bringing the chest into the movement. I'll even do on a regular basis warm-ups or finish out with the fat bells and getting that huge stretch. Let's talk a little bit about this extra range of motion, the benefits, the scapular side of that, but the extra range of motion, bringing the chest into play, and how that affects velocity, how that affects overall strength gains. Because again, the traditional bench, you're not getting a real big range of motion. When I was going for my heaviest bench presses, when I used to lift really, really heavy, the actual distance was pretty short by the time you have a big arch and everything else. This is a totally different range of motion, has a totally different feel. And because of that, the benefits, and I know you guys have talked a little bit about this, are more velocity, safety, and strength. And for me personally, actually healing of the shoulder injuries, because I can put that shoulder in the right position to receive a load. Because that's one of the problems when we're rehabbing injuries, people just don't do the exercises anymore. And so this actually, you can still load that muscle. You're making it stronger. You're making the joint stronger, the scap stronger, but you're doing that all in safety. So I've kind of thrown a lot out there. If you guys want to just jump on that and explain a deeper dive into that.
I'll take a quick stab at the range of motion, and I'll let Dan add to it because he's still training people on a regular basis. He'd be able to add more, like get feedback from what he's been doing with his clients as well. But when you're talking greater range of motion, like you were saying, has several advantages. So you're talking about a more comprehensive muscle activation, which is huge for gaining strength and rehabbing potential injuries that you might not even know you had at the time. That also ensures that all your muscles are effectively, or your muscle fibers are effectively targeted during exercises. So when you're normally benching on the flat surface, not only do you not get a full range of motion, most people are shortening it to maximize the load they're pushing. So they're getting even less out of the movement and compromising shoulder health in the process. So, and additionally, the increased range of motion also promotes, like you said, healthy and flexible shoulders. So putting them under load through their natural range helps repair the damage that's been done by the flat bench because they're engaging the stabilizers, they're going through their full range, and they're getting worked as they're actually designed to be worked through their contractile range instead of a shortened one. So on top of that, you're talking, you know, on top of the increased range of motion and ensuring injury resilience, ultimately the greater range of motion is going to help you achieve overall strength, musculature development, stabilization in your shoulder girdle, which is huge for force transfer, long term, strength building. The more efficient you are, and transferring force when you're pressing, the more you're going to be able to press. And we're also talking about proper recruitment of motor patterns. So one of the biggest things that I think is completely overlooked on the bench is when you're laying on a bench and you're constantly going through a dysfunctional shoulder pattern, you're teaching your body to be dysfunctional, like you would be like when you ride a bike, you never forget. Basically, once you learn how to ride a bike, you never forget how to. And once you myelinate a motor pattern like that, and the neural axons are myelinated, there's that super highway for the movement, and it's more and more and more efficient, which obviously has a huge carryover in strength. So when you're doing constantly pressing on a surface that's encouraging improper motor patterns, you're myelinating dysfunctional shoulder mechanics in your brain. So that's incredibly hard to overcome once it's ingrained in your brain. So that's an entirely different aspect that we've been, obviously trying to really bring attention to as well, besides the fact that it's causing this disruption of the shoulder's natural mechanics. So there's two big problems going on that needed to be addressed. And putting them through their full range under load, allowing them to operate the way they're designed to, that's going to help correct all of that. And also build resilience to injury over time, build the muscles to their full shape, like a bodybuilder is always trying to get, but also build your endurance as well. So, if you're talking greater range of motion, it should be a gold mine for power lifters. More explosion out of the hold because they're training a deeper range safely. What a camera bar tries to do, but still incurs the same problem on the surface. So a lot of things going on there that have huge carryover long term for not just your strength, but also your health. So and Dan, I'll let you add to it in whatever way you want there, sir. We can get into velocity after that, but that one's going to take a little bit of talking points because there's a lot to add there. But go ahead, Dan.
In the end, what that all covers is certainly a necessary in-depth understanding of what's going on in the body. But and that's great. We need people to understand that about what this thing does and what it's capable of helping people to achieve when it comes to actually implementing the launch pad. But like Andrew said, I'm in the trenches every day training clients of all kinds and have done that for a long time. And I've got people who are, in their 70s and 80s, and I've got people who are young athletes just coming up as young as 7 and 8 years old, learning to do these things. And it really is something that addresses that issue from a number of perspectives for all of those demographics. And for a coach to be able to intuitively give a few simple cues that someone can implement right away, immediately start to understand and make a connection with their own body in an impactful way that helps them to build not just physical strength, but mental fortitude and confidence. That's what I'm looking for in any given tool that I'm going to bring into my gym and, add something else to somebody's training basket that's going to take time away from other things. I want that to be the most impactful thing that we're going to do for that given movement pattern. And that's what I was always looking for when it came to the launch pad, and why we would always do BOSU ball or stability ball or whatever it was, is you're trying to get all of those recruitment and biomechanics issues addressed as effectively as possible. But the truth of the matter is, we know that when it comes to the bench press, this is the thing that you can load up the heaviest and get the most impact from, but we have to still deal with the fact that it's going to cause issues over time. So how do we, as coaches, tangle with that whole thing? And I can tell you that I've seen my elderly populations get just as much, if not more benefit, at least in the short term, from that, which is to say, when we're on the launch pad, yes, this is harder and we have to lower the weight, but my shoulders feel better. And then as an added benefit, when I take it away, holy crap, suddenly I can bench more, and I can bench heavier weights that I wasn't as capable of benching before. And it feels way easier, actually. And what's going on there? You have the post-activation potentiation effect, right? The shoulder stabilizers are more engaged. That longer stretching cycle is all there. And I didn't have to say a word about any of that to my client, by the way. I said, sit down, get in position, and let's do some warm-up, right? We don't have to go into all the science. They don't care. They don't want to know about all that. No. They want to know that what I'm doing as a coach and as a professional is guiding them in the right direction. They want to be able to drop their brain in the bucket and learn at their own pace. They're not going to sit here watching science videos about shoulder health all day. Right? They just want to bench press. So, for that population, right, is a lot of these guys are restoring their confidence, and girls are restoring their confidence in their own body and getting a tremendous benefit biomechanically for their long-term health, as well as their physical health, as well as their mental health. And these are the same people who are, self-professed previous benchers who will no longer touch the bench anymore until they've trained with me at this point. And utilizing the launch pad as part of that protocol, we can spend more time building real strength and real muscle rather than spending all that time doing, remedial, shoulder stabilization and, shoulder exercises. We can add a lot more value to their actual strength training. And then when it comes to my younger population, their learning curve is that much shorter. They're getting a fresh start at bench press training, especially if they're going to be a young athlete who has to do that for various types of combines, whether that's high school or college and into the pros eventually. Their starting point is just that much better. I can have a young kid lay down on a bench and work on either some kind of a banded press or dumbbell press, and then work up to barbells and what have you over time. And we know that they're going to have a fantastic growth pattern over time. They'll develop those motor neurons and that muscle memory early and often, and they'll be that much better for it in the long term. And that's the greatest part about it, is it makes my life that much easier as a coach. All I have to do is get a few simple cues and they get there pretty much immediately. Takes a lot of the work out of it for me. And, through all the different testing that we've done between the velocity testing and the research studies that are going on that we're doing with the doctor, for the university study, all that stuff is going to just further legitimize what it is we're doing here. But the truth is, you put the launch pad on and bench the same weights that you would traditionally bench for your warm-ups and even your working sets, it's going to feel a heck of a lot heavier. But when you take the launch pad away, weights that you wouldn't maybe normally try to tangle with are going to feel easier. And that's the long and short of it. And that's what we've seen pretty much unanimously, particularly in people who are very in tune with their body on the bench press.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it, Dan. Like J.L. Holdsworth said, it makes you a Yoda coach. It puts you in better position across the board. And it isn't just bench press. This is anything that you use a flat bench for to train. I mean, it could be shoulder press. It could you can lay prone on it with your face down, and you still get the benefit for hitting your back. But to add to what Dan said, we've been doing it's been a year plus that I've been working with Dr. Palmer. We're working with Coach Storms at Florida State. That we're going to be getting a D1 version of our current study more in depth, and then we're also going to be studying the cause and effect patterns of why things are happening and why we think they're happening, hooking the EMGs up. So we're going to really start digging into the nerdy science for people. But we already have a pretty very solid grasp on why you're seeing that post activation potentiation happening, and then it kind of all stems back from being a more intense exercise with the launch pad. And when you go back to the flat bench, like what happened, like I always say, if you watch a baseball player on the on deck circle, they put the donut on their bat, they're swinging it around, and they go up to the plate, they're going to whip the bat around with a heck of a lot more speed. It's basically the same thing that happens on the launch pad. It's a little bit more intense, but it gets all of the supporting structures and co-activating muscles firing as they need to for you to perform optimally. And the weight that you just touched, you're gonna throw it through the damn ceiling, and that we're talking even top triples. We're seeing huge velocity and power production increases. And of course, we're also measuring the range of motion to validate that. But we're going to come back and hit on that in another study and more in depth with some more fancy tools. So that's going to be very exciting. But we're like Dan was saying, we're working with Dr. Palmer, and we've collected the data on 32 participants. And these are resistance trained men and women that have a minimum of like 10 years or 15 years of lifting experience. So these aren't beginners. These are folks that know what they're doing, that have benched all their lives, and they're blown. They've been, I mean, it's Dan's seen it 100 times. So have I. It's the face lights up like, what the hell just happened? Because they can't make sense of it, because it literally measures their fatigue dropping after they get off the launch pad and go back to the flat bench too. So their perceived level of exertion just drops off, and it even has been showing it in the numbers. And then it's also projecting the 1 rep max, and I had someone's 1 rep max to jump 80 pounds. So it's crazy. It's almost like you can't believe it. It's happening in front of your eyes. It doesn't make any sense. It makes sense to us because we've been really digging into the details, but really exciting stuff in terms of being able to implement it in strength training to get best results more efficiently for any sport, really, because a lot of sports do avoid it, the bench press, especially throwing athletes now. So they can bring the bench press back into their training. Like Dan said, you don't have to do any of the Mickey Mouse shit for stability and all that boring stuff that people like avoiding because it's time consuming and it's just not fun to do. Now you have an exercise that you can go back to that you loved in the first place, but it's going to be more effective, more functional, but it's also going to have more carryover into your sport specific training too, no matter what sport you're in. So a lot of great points to obviously add to that. But Dan, I'm gonna toss it back over to you. See if you have any more to add to that, man.
Yeah, I mean that's really the long and short of it is, as we continue to get more and more people onto the launch pad and better understand what we know foundationally from so many other studies and so many other disciplines, when it comes to bringing a tool into the training environment that's going to have a great impact and it's going to allow you to do the most impactful things. That's what it comes down to: efficiency and efficacy. That's what I look for in any product that I bring into my training system and my facility. Is it's got to be efficient, it's got to be effective, and then it's also got to be pretty mobile and deployable, right? I deal with a lot of tactical athletes, military, law enforcement. This is something that can pretty easily go into just about any training environment. If you're going to have benches anyway, then you should have a launch pad to go with it. You can carry it in a backpack if you'd like to. And maybe it'll make a great rucking tool too. You really need
actually
out there. You could do floor bench with a launch pad down on the ground and get still tremendous benefit from it. Even if you're the type of person or type of coach who subscribes to, 90-degree angles and a lot of pause reps and things like that, you're still getting the benefit of the shoulder blades floating. If you like to use unstable bars that shake and earthquake bars, the bar has been addressed, but the bench itself has not been addressed, and neither have the shoulders. So something and all the tools will only be more effective when integrated with something like the launch pad, and that's really what it comes down
Me too, there, Dan. I was going to say proprioceptive overload with like an earthquake bar and a launch pad. That'll make a fool out of you if you're not ready for it. But it feels fantastic.
It's only that much better when the benching surface itself has actually properly been addressed, and that's what we're talking about.
Right. You're not just mitigating the problem. You're actually now you're strengthening your shoulder, like you're trying to do with those extra exercises to begin with. Now you're not just wasting your time basically treading water. You're making progress.
Let me jump in there a little bit about the earthquake bar. One of the things that we know is when you do the earthquake bar, you have to stop it at least an inch above the chest, or it takes all the kinetic energy out of it. So by having the extra range of motion, you're getting much more benefit about that, because you do have to stop. So you're actually getting, a healthier response. You're getting a deeper range of motion without touching the chest, so that the kinetic energy is still in the bar. So if you're a guy who loves to use the earthquake bar for bench, I know a lot of quarterbacks like to use that for stability, this is going to be a great, great tool for you, because it's going to increase, again, your results from an already great product.
Right. And John, to add to that, they almost don't even need to, but it'd be just almost doubling up.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal.
Right. Yeah. And even like Dan and I will mess around with the camber bar and go super deep. If you want, like the launch pad will give you up to almost a 2-inch range of motion difference sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And then you throw in a camber bar and it feels like you're on the damn floor with the bench, but it's the deepest stretch you've ever felt. But going back to the earthquake bar, a lot of people do that to mitigate injury too, or it's a rehab injury. So now they might not even necessarily need to do that anymore, because they're engaging their shoulder the way it needs to be engaged to stay healthy, instead of just kind of mitigating the problem and again treading water, just hoping that it doesn't get worse. So
and two more things before we get into velocity real quick, which we want to cover. The first thing I want to do before you get to velocity is what's the recommended protocol for using the launch pad? Do you recommend people do all of their pressing on it, or do you recommend them doing it as warm-up sets and then taking it off? I have not maxed out yet without it, so I don't even, I leave it on all the time. So when I eventually do take it off, it's going to be a crazy effect. But what's your recommended training protocol with that? Do you use it for warm-ups? Use it for your entire sets? Kind of jump on that a little bit.
And you can probably add to this. So it really depends on your training objective, first of all, and if you're dealing with an injury and your level of experience. So beginners, folks dealing with injury, use it through probably your whole chest workout, because you want to make sure you're nailing the patterns, make sure you're building the foundation. Folks with injuries, this is going to help rebuild that damage. So for those types of folks, use it through your whole chest workout. For folks training for like bench press strength, for example, warm-ups, and then take it off and go back to the flat bench after a slight intermission. And what we found is 3-minute break between taking it off and going back to the flat. That's when you're going to see the big jump in velocity and power production. Then on the flip side, if you're a power lifter, use it on a secondary day, but also train just a flat day, or use it as an auxiliary exercise or a variation that you're using in your toolbox. But don't use it. We never say just use it through your whole routine if you're training for strength, because you have to train on surface that you would, like for powerlifters, they're going to be competing on. You have to train like you're going to compete. That's what they'll always tell you, even in any sport. So on top of that, for bodybuilders or any folks training for hypertrophy, recreational gym goers, those folks might be more better off just keeping it on there because you're going to get a better range. You're going to get a better pump for hypertrophy because you're getting a deeper range, and you're also recruiting more of your chest, and you're going to be safer throughout your entire routine there. If all you're doing is hitting chest with it, but you can take it so many different directions, and we can get into that later. But Dan, pass it to you. You know, you're still training people. Is there other ways that you would recommend doing it that I didn't touch on, or?
No, yeah, that about covers it. I mean, that's what it comes down to is specificity in the end, and
Right.
knowing what the individual end goal is. For individuals who are just looking for long-term health and slow, steady, consistent improvements, without any major hiccups to slow them down and bench press injuries being one of those major injury events that'll really slow someone's progress down. Just keep it on, But again, if you're going to be maxing out on a bench or you really want to display the sheer power and the end result of the improvement that the Launchpad can provide on your bench press, because that's what you get paid to do and that's your livelihood, then train on the bench press as often as you need to with the Launchpad, and then train in the actual legitimate environment that you're going to be competing in. But I'd say for the most part, everybody in all of those realms should consistently implement the usage of the Launchpad as part of their actual strength and power and hypertrophy work, and then on only a need to only basis transfer back over to the regular bench, so they can properly feel the weight that they're going to be competing at and actually making attempts on.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that really boils down to is it just makes all of your reps that much more effective.
Right. And like say you're trying to hone the skill of the bench press, it's perfect because it's very, very specific to the bench too. So you're not actually doing an entirely different exercise. You're still doing the bench, but it's going to help you really build that skill. So if skill training as well. And then, for power lifters, warming up on the platform, boom, there isn't a better way to warm up than if you can throw that on and time it right, you're going to crush it on the platform, and it'll be drastic. So
Yeah, and
those are
it's
one of the things I wanted to add to that.
yeah, it's like John Brookfield and I used to say, what's the best exercise for a field goal kicker? Well, it's kicking field goals. So you do a lot of assistance work, so it really does come down to that. But what is just real quickly, because I think we're heading, I want to be respectful of time. Can you share a little bit of the velocity change that happens? I mean, this is flat out fact. This isn't bro science. You can hook the measuring tools up to it. Can you talk about how the Launchpad increases the velocity of the bar when it's pressed?
Yep. So what the effect that causes the velocity change is the increased range of motion and the obviously intensity differences between the flat bench and the launch pad. So when you're on the launch pad, you're obviously getting a better utilization of the stress shortening cycle. So that's recruiting more of your motor units, and then you're also working more of your chest fibers. So we're putting them through a deeper range, but then again, the intensity level is also more. So we take that, and there's a huge difference. But in terms of data, what we've seen is we've measured a 13% increase in velocity, and this is with 32 participants. So men and women, again, at least 10 years of experience. I would say it's probably, if I were to pull up the data, I think it's closer to 15 years on average. Power production also has actually 14% increase, and then peak velocity, 13% increase overall across the board. So some folks are really seeing huge differences. The stronger folks seem to get even more velocity changes and power production changes than some of the folks that aren't as strong. It might just be because their body's more apt to be more explosive, but it's been consistent, and that's a very, very drastic difference in change in production of velocity and power across the board. And then the range of motion, this is where it was getting tricky because a lot of times we noticed that when you take the launch pad off and you have the linear encoder and you're measuring, the data, the power production is so much greater. People are popping the bar, so it's kind of skewing some of the range of motion, and they're going further like into protraction than they need to be because they have that big of a difference in their power production. Like I had a guy literally say he felt like he was lifting off the bench, and he was. It was insane. Like his power jumped over 100 watts on every rep. And this guy's he's a good sized dude, obviously, but his 1 rep max went from 365 to 437, I think it was. He was like, "Holy shit, we really just saw that happen," and there's no joke. And then tell you, we go back and look at all the projected 1 rep maxes, like to go along with it. It lines up almost directly with what we're seeing with velocity. Percentage wise, it'd be a little bit greater, but that's not what we're looking at right now. We're really focusing on power and velocity, but it's been consistent, very consistent. Dan, you got.
Yeah. So, when it comes to, the training populations that we've been primarily focusing on testing, a lot of really experienced benchers, but again, doing the same kind of testing on relatively untrained populations or far less trained populations, we're seeing far better scapular stability, shoulder stability, much more improved learning curve on how to actually get into position when the launch pad is removed. And then, of course, the velocity is changing considerably. So, the learning curve drastically reduces, and that person is getting into a much better position to bench effectively over time. So that's what we've seen in the younger populations or the folks who, haven't traditionally bench pressed very much as part of their programming because we didn't really feel the need to avoid injury and what have you. So it's a unanimous response, whether you're a highly trained bench presser or, a recreational lifter who's adding bench press in, for the first time or periodically including it into your programming, and you want to start having more of that benefit of training your shoulders and your back and pretty much your entire upper body if you're doing it properly, right? So, I've even had a few of my clients describe, much more of feeling their actual back and middle back sensors, their lats getting more involved, sheerly from a bench press day, where we did no other back training, but now they actually see the benefit of including their back in their bench press training. So that's really what it should be. That's what we wanted it to be all along. It's just really hard to do that when the bench isn't allowing you to do it. So
right, and they have to be aware too, and it's hard to be aware of it when you can't do it. So when you've got that feedback from the launch pad going on, it just helps teach better form and keep them aware. And I mean, they don't even have to, like Dan said, they don't have to understand it, but they'll feel it, and they don't have to feel it to understand. But you do have to feel it, right, Dan? So I believe that's how you say it. But
easier to have the right tools to allow that to happen. It's got to be the right tool for the right person at the right time.
And you're talking, if you're a coach too, this gives you so much more time to get, forge more valuable relationships with your players. And you're not having to babysit. You can be almost confident in the fact that, hey, I can put these kids on the bench or my players on the bench, and they're less likely to actually get injured unless they're just being stupid. Because it's putting you in all the right positions. You're not going to have to teach that. They don't have a choice. It forces it. And they're not going to be able to protract their shoulders into a dangerous position either. You won't be able to. It's period. And they're like, you go ahead and try. It's not happening. So
Yeah,
and those are big things.
and one of the bonuses that I found for most people is actually fixing their posture. If you use this on a regular basis, we have this tech neck where everybody's leaned over, they're looking at their phones. You're always in a bad position. Students are sitting in school longer than they ever have before. People are sitting longer than they ever have before. And so a lot of them, what I call is, they have scapular amnesia. They don't even know how to recruit the back. They don't even know how to flex that back out. When you get done with a set, of course, what I like to do to really feel it is go deep with some fat bells just to get a really big stretch. You find yourself walking, for the next hour differently because the scaps are protracted, everything's back where it should be. So there's so many benefits to this, and we'll have to do maybe a round 2, because I think we're just scratching the surface. We might have to have you guys come back sometime with all the new things that are happening. But just a couple other questions real quick is, first of all, what are some of the teams that are early adopting? I always talk about there's always an interesting group that is on the cutting edge. I remember when kettlebells, even though they've been around forever, when they first came to America, I was one of the first guys. I was like, I got to jump on this. I got to try that. What are some of the teams that are already adopting this and reaping the results?
So we've got a pair of high schools, more than a pair. I'm just going to say a pair. There's a couple of schools in Ohio that are currently using it at the high school level. Some big name gyms like Crunch. There's one in South Florida called Rule. Army West Point's got some. Florida State's got some. Austin Pay. They're going to kill me for mispronouncing it, but I do it every time. Where we just went, they've got some. And that's just off the top of my head. Obviously, CT Fletcher got some big names like CT Fletcher, Mike O'Hearn, obviously Dan. You got Jeff Lovecchio, JL Holdsworth, Matt Wenning. Matt Wenning won't ever use it because I think it kind of goes against this whole thing with the warm up. I don't know, but he's of course not going to promote other equipment either because he's an equipment producer. But he has one. Gunnar Peterson's got one. I could go on and on. I'm trying to think of Metroflex here in Fort Worth has a couple. I'd have to pull it all up on but that's just to name a few. Go ahead, Dan.
JL Holdsworth, Joel Seedman, all these guys really get it from a neurological perspective. Understand why this is such an important addition, and it doesn't really take anything away. It only progresses it further and faster.
And to really hit on what you were saying, John, with posture, I mean, your posture's off, everything's off. Your biomechanics are off, your form's off, your execution is going to be off, and you're just sitting here. That's another thing that causes shoulder injury more than anything is faulty or forward shoulder posture. It's the root of a lot of problems, and the techie environment we live in, we're almost prone to it. So if you're using a launch pad, it's going to reset your shoulders. It's going to, and over time, it might be resetting that motor pattern for you and saving it in the long run. If you're one of those people that sits there and has the forward lean going, you just want to pull them back and help them out when you see them. It looks ridiculous, but
that's the beauty of the central, isn't it? Right? Being the brain being somewhat plastic, right? The neuroplasticity factor, it can be retrained, especially if any kind of intention is put behind it. And I've seen it happen in plenty of people who are older who, once they finally make that mind-body connection, they understand what's necessary to just change that exercise, but how that exercise changes their daily life and the activities they partake in on a daily basis. So it does make.
Yeah, and you'll right away after using it, you go to a flat bench, you're gonna be almost mocking what you did on the launch pad automatically without even thinking about it. And that's exactly what we wanted to happen. So it's we don't have to tell you. You have to try it though, because you can't fake.
That's it. Put it on your bench, lay down, do a few sets, try the same weight or more weight than you would typically go after for a certain rep scheme, and see it for yourself. That's all it comes down to. Really.
One disclaimer I do want to mention though, is I have had people say, "Oh man, I'm not as strong." Well, it's because it is more intense and you're going deeper. Your body has to adapt, just like everything, and it's gonna feel maybe 20 or 30 pounds heavier at first. But once you adapt, you're gonna be much stronger long term. If you're impatient, just warm up with it and take it off, and you'll get your strength back.
Yeah, for sure.
So.
And you can see how people are already adopting this right now. It's kind of catching on, and it's really in its infancy. It's a new product. You were talking about Florida State getting some. We got to get these into University of Michigan. I know you're an Ohio State guy, but we want to get my Wolverines. Get them some.
I'm all for it, man. Anything that help the kids too. This you're talking about probably for the combine. This could be a huge difference maker for them. You know,
Yeah.
because a lot of the, I mean, even the strong college kids, their bench press form's terrible.
Yeah.
Let's get them strong. Let's repair their shoulders and let's longer, healthier NFL careers, and maybe even bigger signing bonus too.
There you go.
Apply for more.
And
So,
my son's a high school football coach too, so I want to get them rocking on this and rolling. So, folks, there's so much more, we could talk about, but today I just want to tell you, take it from me. This is something I use on not just a weekly basis, multi-week. I use it during the week multiple times. It's a bench for your bench. You can take it anywhere. It comes with a backpack. So if you train at a gym, if you don't train at your home, you can throw it in the backpack. It fits any bench out there. And I can promise you this, if you will put in the work, the results will be beyond what you can imagine. And that was what it was for me. I said, I want to put this thing through the paces. And I can tell you in the past few months, just the increases have been incredible. I want to thank our guests, Andrew Harvot and Daniel Palacios, for investing in all our listeners today. And again, hopefully we can have you guys back to take a deeper dive into all things bench and go out and get a bench for your bench. Thank you, guys.
thanks, John. We appreciate you having us, man. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks a lot, John. It's been great.
Again, if you want your own launch pad, you can save big with coupon code JOHN20. That's JON20. I want to thank our sponsors today for such a great show: ZionMissionaryChurch.net, NeuroPowerSource.com, our podcast producer, Drew Kiespert, video director, Jolyn Thomas, head of talent relations, Mr. Fairfax Hackley. Be sure to rate and subscribe to the Pressing Limits podcast. Follow us on Instagram for all the latest episodes. And for more ways to listen to this podcast, check out the Pressing Limits podcast website. We'll see you next time.